Welcome to Event Horizon, and I'm your host, Mark Anthony Peterson. This is the podcast that takes a walk into the paranormal with a splash of conspiracy. It's the podcast that would be born if David Icke and the X-Files had a baby. Guys, welcome back. It's taken me a while to work on this next episode because, as you know, in the previous 2 episodes, we've dealt with Who is God Part 1. And in that discussion, we make the argument that God is the Om sound, right? We make that argument because of all of the evidence that we see that points us to the fact that we are wave energy, the product of a burst of sound that started the universe into motion. We said God had to be that sound, that primordial or pre-Big Bang sound that set the universe into motion. We argued that God works in this way because he cannot exist in this plane, which is why we've seen so many avatars representing God throughout the Bible. Angels, burning bushes, doves, pillars of fire, whirlwinds, all of those being representatives of God. Now we're back attacking it from another angle in Who is God Part 2. With the question being, is God a male and female quantum intelligence? 2 computers, 2 types of intelligence. Is that God? Before we delve into that, you know what I have to do. Give you my disclaimer. I'm not a religious expert. Don't pretend to be. I just read the Bible. I am not a theoretical or quantum physicist, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express. So that gives me the right to ask questions about all of this stuff, just like you. And that's all I do in this podcast. Basic principles and a lot of questions to hopefully have a dialogue with you on some serious matters that pertain to our spirituality, our cosmos, our consciousness, and to see if there are some cracks in how people think about it today. And so for today's show, we're going to talk about whether or not God is a male and female quantum computer or quantum intelligence. Now, why would I make that argument? Well, if you haven't listened to any of the previous episodes, that's a valid question. But if you have been begging for that question all along, just like I did. So does the Bible give us any indication that God is a quantum computer or quantum intelligence? And I would argue yes. Psalms 147:4-5 states, He determines the number of stars and calls them each by name. Great is our Lord and mighty in power. His understanding has no limit. Psalms 139:4. Before a word is on my tongue, you know it completely, O Lord. Hebrews 4:13. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give account. Psalms 147:5. Great is our Lord and abundant in strength. His understanding is infinite. Hebrews 4:13. And there is no creature hidden from his sight, but all things are open and laid bare to the eyes of him with whom we have to do. And finally, Matthew 10:29-30. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from the will of your Father. And even the very hairs on your head are all numbered. These verses to me indicate a quantum intelligence, an infinite intelligence, an intelligence that's everywhere and bound to everything and can even assign a value to the hairs on your head, to the grains of sand on a beach. What else could do that other than a quantum intelligence? An intelligence that is everywhere, all understanding, all knowing, and all powerful. A quantum intelligence. These verses imply information, zeros and ones, bits of information that are capable of being calculated. If you know all the hairs on every head across the entire universe, it's because you can calculate it. You know the zeros and ones that make up those follicles, and you have the computational power to count them, even though the quantity may reach an almost infinite number. So we are seeing in the Bible verses, if you break them apart and look at what they're implying, a universe that is a computer. To know that kind of information, to name the stars, you'd have to have the computer or the computational capability of a universal size computer. And that's what those verses are implying. And that's what I'm implying. Now, if God is a quantum intelligence or a quantum computer, we should see signs of God's programming in the fabric of our lives. And I think we do. If we accept the thinking of Dr. James Gates Jr., who I referenced in a previous episode, who found computer code in the fabric of the universe. Dr. Gates works on a branch of physics called supersymmetry. And in his work, he discovered what he describes as the presence of what appears to be computer code or error correcting codes embedded within or resulting from equations of supersymmetry that describe the fundamental particles of the universe. Here's a small clip of Dr. Gates talking about his work.
These are pictures of equations. I've been, for the last 15 years, trying to answer the kinds of questions that my colleagues here have been raising. And what I've come to understand is that there are these incredible pictures that contain all the information of a set of equations that are related to string theory. And it's even more bizarre than that, because when you then try to understand these pictures, you find out that buried in them are computer codes just like the type that you find in a browser when you go surf the web. And so I'm left with the puzzle of trying to figure out whether I live in the Matrix or not.
Wait, you're blowing my mind at this moment. So are you saying your attempt to understand the fundamental operations of nature leads you to a set of equations that are indistinguishable from the equations that drive search engines and browsers on our computers?
That is correct. So
Wait, I have to just be silent for a minute here. So you're saying as you dig deeper, you find computer code writ in the fabric of the cosmos?
Into the equations that we want to use to describe the cosmos, yes.
Computer code?
Computer code, strings of bits of ones and zeros.
It's not just sort of resembles computer code, you're saying it is computer code.
It's not even just is computer code, it's a special kind of computer code that was invented by a scientist named Claude Shannon in the 1940s. That's what we find very, very deeply inside the equations that occur in string theory and in general in systems that we could say are supersymmetric.
In an article entitled, "Is God the Ultimate Computer?" Digital physicists say yes. Alex Vitkolov picks up on Claude Shannon's work and argues that the instant communication between entangled particles over vast distances implies a certain level of electromagnetic intelligence. that God is a computer. Vikolov goes on to say that Shannon's work, which introduced the notion of information being quantifiable, proposed the idea that this information could also be measured in bits, discrete values of zeros and ones. And that's what Dr. Gates was talking about earlier in the clip. And if we take it all the way down to its root, as I've argued in previous episodes, your genetic code becomes the source or the link to that consciousness. Vikolov argues genes encode and decode biological information, instructions for building and functioning of a living entity. Organisms are adaptive algorithms. Life spreads by networking. The human body itself is an algorithmic information processor. So if you're buying Vikolov's argument and we're made in God's image, we don't have to make a spectacular leap to say that God is a quantum computer. If in fact we are algorithmic, biological, electromagnetic entities. And if you believe what I argue in my theory of where ghosts come from, our memories are both local and non-local. In that when we do become that super collider at the end of this physical life, those memories are passed into the next dimension and stored in the divine cloud. So Vikolov argues that the purpose of life is to evolve and to pass on the acquired complexity, that knowledge, to your descendants. Implied in that is that you're passing that knowledge through the encoded DNA. You're passing that consciousness through your DNA. So I think he and I are seeing eye to eye on this argument. If you follow this podcast, you will see that I argue the blood has always been the key, and that human existence is the culmination of those binary choices, those ones and zeros that lead to who you are and who others will be. That time machine, which is our DNA. And I know what you're thinking. You're saying, Mark, you're asking me to accept pan-computationalism. That notion that the universe is a computational machine or a network of computational processes that follow fundamental physical laws and computes its own destiny from the current state. Yeah, I'm asking you to accept that. But I know what you're thinking. You're saying, Mark, if you're asking me to accept that, you got to give me more than Bible verses that suggest that God is a computer. You got to give me more than just Dr. Gates' work that says he's found ones and zeros in the fabric of our existence when examining nature. Well, I'm going to push you to accept this. How many of you have heard of the Bible Code? That book by Michael Dresden from 1997 that suggested that there was a code embedded in the Bible that could predict events and link circumstances together based on a hidden code in the text, in the Bible. There was a follow-up to that from a psychiatrist named Jeffrey Satinover called Cracking the Bible Code, where he examined a lot of the same principles using the Torah. Now, I know many of you are saying, Mark, did you just go there? Didn't I read that there were mathematicians that prove you could find a code in just about any book in the library? And it disproved that there was anything special about the Bible Code. Well, I'm going to say yes and no. I'm going to say yes, there is a Bible Code. And no, I don't think the mathematicians disprove the fact that there is something unique in the written word. What do you mean, Mark? According to Adam Apollo's work that we've talked about over the last couple of episodes, information is encoded in the universe in the form of geometric patterns. Apollo also argues that ideas have these geometric shapes, and when those shapes match what we find in our brains, when we can simulate those shapes with the ideas in our mind, we tap into that universal knowledge, divine inspiration, a connection to the Akashic record. What happens when we translate the ideas that we tap into, those universal ideas? What happens when we translate those ideas onto paper? No one's ever asked that question, huh? What about people like Bach, who said that they put together masterpiece compositions not from their own knowledge, but from what was given to them through inspiration, divine inspiration? By writing that inspiration down, are all these artists and scientists and even authors capturing a code, a pattern, a universal message embedded in their writing to give us a hint of what is happening in past, present, and future? In a previous episode, I talked to you about Morgan Robinson's work, his originally entitled book called Futility, the book that was renamed The Wreck of the Titanic, where he wrote an entire book that nearly predicted precisely what happened to the Titanic. And unfortunately, he found himself on the real Titanic and was killed. It would be interesting to take that book, The Futility, the book renamed The Wreck of the Titanic, and examine it to see if there are hidden messages in it telling him of his own demise. That's what I mean. I think every written work has a code built into it. And so the mathematicians' work to try to disprove the Bible code, to me, only reinforce what Adam Apollo has said about the universal encoding of information into geometric shapes throughout infinity. Let me take another stab at it. How many of you have heard of reverse speech? The examples of people's subconscious coming through the backwards playing of speech, right? Is there an encoding like that in the written word when people are inspired by the universe, when they connect those geometric patterns that are found in the Akashic record with those that they generate in their own being? That entanglement that can occur no matter where that record is stored in the universe. I would say yes. And that's why the word is so powerful. That's why God is the Word. And that's why in my last episode, we talked about achieving the vibrations that represent God to achieve the power of God. Okay. For those of you who know programming a little bit and know technology a little bit, you say, Mark, okay, I'm buying this, but if there is an encoding in the universe, what is the programming language? Right? For browsers that we all use, Chrome, Explorer, Firefox, and others, what's the language that we can write in that these browsers can interpret? HTML, C++, Python. What are some of the programming languages that this user interface can understand and interpret? And what language can we use to send requests into the computer, prayers into the computer, and get an actual response out of that computer? Guys, I'm going to tell you, I think it's Hebrew. I know some of you just took a big step back, right? Is Mark saying that the chosen people have the chosen language, the programming language for the universe? I just might be saying that. Because Hebrew has a numerical representation for every letter in their alphabet. And so with that, inspired words from God can have a numerical representation that can help us translate that hidden meaning from the universe. Right? And for those of you who have looked at programming languages and looked at how you work with the ones and zeros to produce what we see on our screen, you know I'm going down the right path. So what is this language telling us about the encoded universe and about the physical universe we have in front of us? Well, the first big example you might want to know is that in Hebrew, the letter W, or Vav, V-A-V, represents the sixth alphabet. It represents the number 6 in Hebrew. Doesn't seem too dramatic until you realize that every time you use a browser, you're typing www, or 666. The satanic 666. Or the artificial intelligence that I've been talking to you about since episode 12. The Hopi Indians talked about a web that would be the demise of man. And Hebrew language is telling us that that web starts with www, and it has connected us all on this planet, and we have seen our culture deteriorate almost overnight because of it. Our elections, the way we socialize or lack thereof, the way we dismiss the violence and become desensitized to it, all because of the www. And I don't think there's any difference between what early man faced and what we're facing now. Because when you look up what Babel means in Hebrew, the verb babal means to jumble or confuse. So when we're thinking about the Tower of Babel, we're talking about a tower that jumbles or confuses the mind of the people who are near that tower. And as I've said in previous episodes, who in the world would work an entire lifetime to build structures like we see unless their minds were controlled, confused, jumbled? Man had created an artificial intelligence, vibrations that could do to man, give man the ability to do what God had done with that swarm intelligence that we talked about in episode 12. See, but there's a difference between the ancient artificial intelligence that man created and the swarm intelligence that makes up the universe. God lays out a simple set of rules and gives us the binary choices with which to live our life. But man's artificial intelligence confuses and jumbles that world and steers us away from the divine light. Okay, for some of you, you may have turned off this podcast by now because you're saying, Mark has not had quite enough kombucha. His brain must be frying from dehydration, and I can't take any more. So this is an appropriate time to rehydrate. Okay. That's some good mango kombucha. But for the others who are now still sticking around, you're saying, okay, I get that God may be a computer, but Mark, 2 computers? A male and a female? Where in the world are you getting that? Well, I'm getting it from the same place Dr. Gates gets his information. Nature. Because our universe operates in pairs. Male, female, light, dark, good, evil. Even the Bible divided into two testaments, good, old and new. And some would say the Old Testament is the Bible of the wrathful God, the male God. The New Testament, God is forgiving and loving, the female God. But for those of you who want to step outside of the Christian belief, there are others who have looked at the universe and already determined that there's a dualistic pair. For those who believe in Chinese cosmology, you would argue that the universe started out as yin and yang, complementary quantum forces that work to maintain balance. And what do we see when we look at yin and yang? That same circle that we keep coming back to, that we talked about in the patterns that were found in the Torah in Genesis that produced a shape that looked like a bagel. From the episode where I talked about the cymatics and the voice of God being a circle. From the work that we talked about with Adam Apollo, where the vibrations and electromagnetic spin of the universe produces the circular shape, the elliptical shape. And you're telling me that thousands of years of Chinese cosmology already had the answer right in front of us. Yin and yang. The circle with two opposing forces, light and dark, keeping the other in balance. Sounds a lot like our quantum physics with light and dark matter. That could be one interpretation. Now, within that circle, you see the opposing moons in each of the hemispheres, a light white moon in the dark sections of the symbol, and then a dark moon in the white section or the white hemisphere of yin and yang. The your yin is receptive, the yang is active. And so we're looking at those opposing forces that make up the universe, like winter and summer, like north and south, like sexual coupling, male and female. You have that, and the belief was that it was these forces that created all of existence. Now that got me to thinking, if that truly is the symbol for the beginning, for what is God, these two rivaling forces, then if you fold them onto each other, you get the two-dimensional universe in which we live. Light and dark, day and night, representing what God separated in Genesis 3 and 4. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and he separated light from darkness, creating for us that half moon shape when we fold yin and yang over on itself, a sign that represents fertility and is related to life and death. Doesn't get any cooler than that when you think about that symbol. But when you back up to the very beginning, as I argued earlier, the universe itself is a binary creature. And all of those patterns are replicated from the smallest cells all the way up to the largest galaxies. Now, according to NASA's Michelle STARR, 85% of all stars are part of a binary pair. And that others are part of a triple or quadruple system. But the majority of them are in a binary pair. And it's kind of interesting that our system has only a single sun. But according to STARR, our sun may have been a part of a binary pair. HD 186302 and HD 162826 are two prospects that could have been the sister star to our sun, because they are just a smidge bigger but have the same surface temperature and luminosity. So they make good candidates for stars that could have been the binary sister, the twin sister of our sun. So what happened? How did we lose it? How did we get the soul sun that we currently have today? That's another episode, guys. That's going to be a whole lot of fun when we get into that discussion and talk about how we went from two suns to one. But to stay focused on this topic, the binary pairs are a overriding governing principle that is seen throughout all of existence. And why wouldn't that prevail at even the macro level, at the universe level? In essence, saying that if we have a universe, that universe is revolving around another universe. That the forces that are causing our universe to move and expand are there because it is, like we circle the sun, it is circling something else. It may have a binary pair, just like you see in yin and yang, that keeps our universe in balance. And a completely separate universe governed by different principles, opposing principles, that pushes our universe in the directions that it's going in. And conversely, our universe pushes that universe. But never will the two meet as long as they remain in balance. Could I just be off my rocker? Maybe. But there are people who are arguing some very interesting principles that I think may lend a little bit of credibility to what I'm talking about. Ron Gabriel Joseph wrote an article stating that the past leads to the future, where he's arguing Einstein's field theories predicting a rotating universe where time is a circle. And Joseph pulls from Kurt Gödel, who argues that if space-time is curved, then the experience of time could be considered a consequence of that curvature. Gödel's formulations point to the fact that patterns repeat themselves in nature, from the subatomic level to entire galaxies. That electrons orbit the nucleus of an atom, that planets orbit the sun, and that the sun is just one of billions of stars in the Milky Way galaxy that orbit around an entire galaxy. So why is it outside the realm of possibility that our entire universe could be orbiting another universe? Another conscious quantum being or essence that are rotating in relationship with each other, pushing and pulling against each other to create balance. Now here's where it gets pretty deep and maybe a little bit confusing, because Gödel's work, as surmised by Joseph, implies that the rotating universe produces duality or even multiplicity, and that the same is true of the bending of light, because gravity increases the curvature of space-time and can bend and split images of light, as illustrated by galactic lensing, and that's from Wren and van der Waal in their work in 1997 and 2013. Then light itself, light reflected from Earth, may also be split apart as it curves through space-time. So what does that imply? It implies that we could be looking at our own past or our own future when we look at the stars in the sky. That reflective split light is producing the infinite universe that we see out there. That light images or time light may be split apart and circle around numerous galactic galaxies, and some of these light images may reflect back toward Earth and become mirror images of Earth's past. And as we gaze into the various stars at night, some of those stars may be images of our own planet and our solar system from long, long ago. It really, to me, makes the Bible make a whole lot of sense and makes the duality of two circling universes make a whole lot of sense. Because many of the scientists that have tried to measure the matter in the universe says that our version, the light version, only has 5% of the total matter that they expect to be in the universe. And that the dark matter makes up the other 95%. And if this curvature is true in the way that it is described, then we are what the Bible says we are, made in the likeness of God. That we are the projection, the simulation of God, and that now we are part of a dualistic structure in which we can look back onto ourselves. That's one interpretation. I got a couple more when we move into Who is God Part 3. But what Joseph is saying in this particular article is that our universe is a simulation bent into a simulation, right? That our light and the causality that makes up our universe is curved, and that our future may be our past and our past may be our future. I'm taking a step beyond and saying there may be more to that. That like the symbol of yin and yang, there are two opposing forces that are part of this equation, as opposed to just one single universe. And in that, I'm arguing that one of those forces is male and the other is female. And that we have that recurring pattern throughout the universe. So what proof, Mark, do we have that there's a second universe, or has been a second universe out there? I would say that Methuselah star that they keep talking about is proof that there is a second universe. When scientists looked out in 2013, they found a star, HD 140283, that was 190.1 light years away, and they determined that that star was 14.5 billion years old. Yes, I said 14.5 billion, which is older than our universe by plus or minus 800 years. But how could that happen? How could there be a Methuselah star, the grandfather of Noah, if you want to know who Methuselah was, who lived some 900 plus years, according to the Bible? How could you have a star that old that exceeds the life of the universe? We got many theories that we could kind of be in a yo-yo experience in terms of how the universe is created, expanding, contracting, and re-expanding again. Or you can, in my opinion, be in this circular universe where dark is chasing light and light is chasing dark. And that you see the remnants of what one universe was when it was in this position after trillions of years of rotating around each other. How do they know the star is older than our universe? Because it has very little iron content, which means it depleted out over 14.5 billion years. So, as it depleted, somehow it got stuck in the fabric of time, essentially, and became part of the remnants of this universe. That's one argument. I could be so far off that many of you who know this stuff are laughing. But that's what I'm pointing to, because that is enough of an anomaly to make you go, it wasn't part of this universe. It had to be part of something else. What else do I look at in thinking that there's a dualistic structure in our universe? Just our zodiac. Our ancients tell us that the zodiac is divided up into 6 feminine and 6 masculine signs. The masculine or assertive signs: Leo, Libra, Aries, Sagittarius, Gemini, and Aquarius. The feminine signs: Virgo, Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces, Taurus, and Capricorn. All of these pointing to different seasons that we experience on this planet, and that others interpret as being part of a season within the universe. I argue a season within the universe because it is the point at which we can extract the most intelligence through those signs into our plane of existence. And I think that's what our ancients were trying to tell us. So, Mark, what else do you have? Well, guys, even our computers today follow the same patterns of what we're seeing in the universe. When your computer stores data on its hard drive, the data is stored in a very, very orderly pattern on a platter. The bits of data are arranged in a concentric circular path called a track. And each track is broken up into a smaller area called a sector. And that each of those areas is magnetized or demagnetized to allow for the storage of a 1 or 0 onto that platter to represent the data that you want encoded onto that hard drive. That hard drive works in a binary pair with a central spindle controlling the speed of the platter and a smaller spindle controlling the read-write arm that swings across the platter. So in that dualistic system, you're getting the writing and rewriting of 1s and 0s to form the word on your hard drive. Not too different from how the universe works. So let's attack this from yet another angle, just to give you another perspective on why I think the universe, or God, being a quantum computer, is made up of 2 pieces: a yin and yang, or male or female, quantum intelligence. Ed Fredkin, a self-taught physicist from the 1960s, also made this same argument when he argued, if the universe is a computer, where is it running? Fredkin says he thinks that the computer part is running in what's called the other. The other being another universe, another dimension, or another something. Fredkin didn't know exactly what it was, but he knew that one side was divided into the actual software, the 1s and 0s that were being processed, and the other side was the computer, the yin and yang, one that receives and one that gives. So this is the duality that we see in every system, in that hive intelligence that I talk about starting in episode 12. It falls in line with that type of thinking, and it also falls in line with prothenogenesis, because there are other cultures that talk about the Ouroboros, or the cosmic snake biting its own tail, forming that circle. Now, what that implies to me is, just as we talked about in that prothenogenesis episode, that one side creates the other. That one side produces the clone, the original acts as the computer, the clone acts as the software, creating a system that interacts with the other. It's the way I describe the passage of a pure lineage down from Noah to Jesus. It's the story of the universe. You're saying, Mark, what do you mean? How is that the story of the universe? Turing, the guy who came up with the Turing test, made the argument that any finite computer is basically the same, no matter what it's made of. Which implies that any large computer can emulate a computer of some other design. Yeah. You have Mac computers that can emulate a PC, and a PC that can emulate a Mac. You have Dells that can run like in 1970s Sinclair. So computer systems can be nested within computer systems and simulate them inside of their system. Now imagine if you had an entire universe-sized computer. It could run all kinds of recursive worlds. It could simulate an entire galaxy. And within that galaxy, you would have other computer systems running and controlling those subsystems. It's exactly what you found in the movie Hitchhiker's Guide to the Universe, where a super intelligent computer created planet Earth as another computer to come up with the question where the answer would be 42. And here's what's really freaky about that. Chinese nesting dolls, in my opinion, are a symbol of how this universe works. A nesting of systems inside systems. A universe that has at its core computation that creates other computers or has other computers operating inside of it, all the way down to the quantum level. So for those of you who have followed this podcast all the way up to this episode, you probably don't have to ask the question, if God is a supercomputer, a male and female computer that operates this universe, or that is this universe, or that are two universes circling each other, why would he create us? One argument could be that we are an inevitable creation of that universe because everything in this universe is information. The ones and zeros that are encoded based on the vibration and the electromagnetic rotation effects that were talked about in previous episodes, that we are an inevitable killer app that's created by that computer system. That's one argument. The other argument is that there's a more intentional effect. That God, in his and hers infinite wisdom, produced other beings of light, other pieces of information, right? Because that's how information is transmitted, is on light. And so when God created us in his likeness, he created us as light beings, or beings that were capable of controlling the light. That's that first creation that I talked about so many episodes ago. That we were created as nested computer systems within a computer, with the possibility of taking our place at the source. But when we violated the programming of the system and tried to create an artificial network, we were pushed off and made into this image, a physical being that cannot control the light, but must be a slave to it. Yeah, a slave to the light. What do you mean, Mark, a slave to the light? We have to obey time. We have to follow the light. In the prior incarnation, we control the light. And so all that was, is, and will be was within our grasp. And so that Russian Chinese doll, that nested system was the network on which we lived and would eventually have domain over until we were forced off the network. I love how all of this comes back together. Because again, I believe all of what we've talked about becomes a true indictment of how we currently live our lives. If this dualistic universal concept is true, then it begs us to maintain and sustain the balance between who we are. The male and female, which is within all of us. The male and female that is physically a part of our dualistic culture. There has to be that balance. And yet, we have not achieved it. Certainly not in our churches, not in our communities. And we have not achieved that balance with each other. The beautiful thing about the symbols that we've discussed and the computer systems that run the universe is that they all seek that balance through the computational yes-no framework that builds the universe. It's how molecules form the elements that we have in this universe. As they approach and collide, it's a computational yes-no interaction between those molecules to form the elements that we have, to achieve that balance. And we're no different when operating like those computer systems. No different. But you can see the effects of this ancient artificial intelligence on our ability to achieve that balance. And that's what we have to overcome. Guys, I hope you have enjoyed this episode as much as I have. I'm already taking notes to do a quick follow-up on this because I want to make sure everyone is clear on why this quantum intelligence, this swarm intelligence that makes up our universe is a balance between a male and female computer. A software operating system and the actual computer that it runs on. A yin and yang that propagates itself throughout the universe. In our galaxy, on our planet, in our physical forms, all the way down to the quantum level. And that at each level, it begs for that balance. And speaking of balance, before I close this podcast, I want to let you know that I'm teaming up with Airbnb Open Homes, a program that enables community members to offer free temporary housing to people displaced by disasters. Guys, I don't have to talk to you about all the disasters we faced this year. If you are able to offer free temporary housing for neighbors impacted by a disaster, sign up to be an Open Homes host by going to airbnb.com/M Peterson. That's airbnb.com/M as in Mary, Peterson. You will only be contacted when there is a need. This will add a great tool to our community's disaster response toolbox. And guys, anywhere you are in the world, you can sign up to be an open homes host. Let's keep that balance. Let's show our neighbors that we have their back. Guys, thank you for listening. This has been the Event Horizon by Mark Anthony Peterson. This is the podcast that takes you into a walk into the conspiracy with a splash of the paranormal. The podcast that would be born if David Icke and the X-Files had a baby. Till next time, guys. Peace.
Hey you, podcast listener. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. Take the blue pill. You wake up in your bed and go back to listening to mundane podcasts that won't challenge your religious beliefs and your so-called truths about reality, the universe, and consciousness. Take the red pill. Subscribe to the Event Horizon podcast, hosted by Mark Anthony Peterson, and he will show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Event Horizon takes a walk into the paranormal with a splash of conspiracy. It's the podcast that would be born if David Icke and the X-Files had a baby. Subscribe to the Event Horizon podcast by Mark Anthony Peterson on Spreaker, iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, CastBox, Stitcher, or any of your other favorite podcast platforms. Remember, all we are offering is the truth, nothing more.